I recently had the absolute pleasure of drowning myself in the literary masterpiece that is Dr. Ricken Laszlo Hale, PhD's, yes, he makes sure you never forget it, groundbreaking self-help book, The You Are. And let's just say I have questions, not just about the book, but about the man, the myth, the legend that is Ricken. If you thought he was insufferable before, just wait until you see him in this full author mode. For those of you who haven't had this spiritual awakening or a psychological endurance test of reading this gem, let me summarize. Ricken is not just a writer. He's an archer, a healer, a nomad, a gadfly, basically the most humble genius to ever grace this earth. His words, not mine. This book, which was somehow delayed due to mysterious corporate interference, is meant to help you find your true self, or make you question why you ever started reading it. But I didn't pick this up for self-improvement. I wanted to see if this book hid any clues, maybe hints about Lumon, reintegration, or even a new theory about our favorite corporate nightmare. What did I get instead? A migraine. But before we toss this into the void, let's dig in. Are there actual hidden Severance breadcrumbs? Or is this Ricken just being Ricken? So without further ado, let's dive into this magnum opus.
What indeed is you?
The book starts with the preface, where Ricken, in all seriousness, warns of widespread dismay and wrath over his book's release. Really, Ricken? The world is on the precipice of collapse over this? But okay, I had a good laugh, and it really set the tone about what I was getting myself into. But then, in that same preface, he says something way more interesting.
Unfortunately, events beyond my control have led to a brief delay, as I liaise with several corporate parties as to precisely where and in what form the book should be released. On the advice of counsel, I sadly cannot say more at this time.
And that's where my Lumon senses went off. What corporate parties? What legal issues? And why was this book delayed at all? Now, we already know from Season 2, Episode 3...
Ricken's words have had a profound effect upon our workers. We think he's really tapped into something.
And, Natalie wants to discuss a version of the UUR specifically for innies.
Which means they clearly see some value in it. So, we could assume that it was delayed because Lumon was tweaking it. Or was it because they didn't want outies reading it? Because those are two very different and equally concerning possibilities. So let's try to lay it out. If the UUR was a direct threat to Lumon, then why wouldn't they have shut it down completely? But instead, they allowed it to be published, and not only that, they want to repurpose it for innies. So that tells me one of two things. Either Lumon thinks Ricken's book can be weaponized as a control mechanism, or Ricken is already in bed with Lumon, maybe without even realizing it. Or, honestly, it could just be both. Now, I know that sounds a little far-fetched, but hear me out. Ricken's entire persona is built around being a guru, an enlightened thinker, a disruptor. But what if his self-help philosophy is exactly the kind of pseudo-spiritual nonsense that Lumon thrives on? Lumon already has its own bizarre ideology with Cure Egan and the Four Tempers, and we've seen how much they love reinforcing a cult-like mindset in their employees. So, if the UUR is basically a corporate-friendly way to make innies more compliant, wouldn't that explain why Lumon is so invested in it? Maybe Ricken isn't actually fighting the system, maybe he's reinforcing it. And if that's true, we have to ask, was Ricken's book even delayed because of corporate interference, or was it delayed because Lumon was negotiating how to use it? I mean, to be honest, and I think everybody will agree on this one, Ricken doesn't strike me as someone who's strategically working with a mega corporation, but at the same time, he was literally in talks with Natalie. Maybe he thought he was too smart to be manipulated, but in reality, he was being recruited the entire time. So, is the UUR a banned book, or is it Lumon propaganda in disguise? If Lumon is actually endorsing this philosophy, then that should can make us question whether Ricken is truly the resistance or just another tool in the system. And here's where things take a turn, because in that same sentence, Ricken doesn't say he was working with just one corporate party. He says,
"As I liaise with several corporate parties as to precisely where and in what form the book should be released."
And that raises the question, who else is involved? Could Lumon have a competitor in this game? And if so, could Ricken be playing both sides? The only real competitor we know of is Dorner Therapeutics, the company mentioned in the Lexington letter, which suggests that Lumon and Dorner were engaged in some kind of corporate war. So is it possible that Ricken wasn't just negotiating with Lumon, but also with Dorner? Could this book have been a tool for both sides, either to control or undermine their employees? And if that's the case, then who is Ricken really working for? Himself, Lumon, Dorner? Or is he just so self-obsessed that he has no idea what he's gotten himself into?
How can you mean different things to millions of readers around a vast earth? And perhaps most importantly, who are you?
If you've been paying attention to Severance, you already know that Lumon's entire ideology is built around Keir Egan's four tempers: woe, frolic, dread, and malice. According to Lumon, these are the components of the human soul, and controlling them is basically the key to enlightenment, or corporate obedience. But then, our genius, completely unaware of how much he mirrors the thing he supposedly hates, comes along with the UUR and introduces his own framework, the 5 personality types: the coward, the warrior, the dove, the scribe, and the vestal. And the second I saw this, my brain started connecting dots that maybe shouldn't be connected, but in a way absolutely needed to be connected, if you know what I mean. Let's go through this. Keir's 4 tempers break down like this. Woe is sadness and melancholy, represented by a crying woman in a bridal dress. Frolic is joy and frivolity, depicted as a jester. Dread is fear, shown as an old woman with a terrified expression. Malice is rage and the desire to harm, symbolized by a ram. Now here's Ricken's 5 personality types.
First, perhaps you simply stopped reading. Fearing the sting of revelation, you hurled the book into the waste bin and fled outside to bury your head in the sand like a duck. These are the actions of the coward. Others among you may have met the news with fury. "To hell with Mozart," you bellowed. "I'll buy an even bigger piano and do the same to him." In your rage, you failed to realize Mozart has been dead for centuries. You are the warrior. By contrast, perhaps your instinct was to defend the young maestro. "He was a sensitive child," you cooed, "and I bet the other boy teased him for his name." These sentiments mark you as the dove. If you quickly went to work committing your feelings on the matter to the page, then you may be the scribe, the rarest type of person. You cannot help but weave your thoughts into splendid prose, for which society rewards you with acclaim. Finally, it's possible you've never heard of Mozart at all. Mayhaps you've spent this whole introduction in self-conscious dread, wondering how this cultural touchstone has eluded your knowledge. To this, I say this: nothing is wrong with you. You are not stupid, nor rube-like, nor corn-fed. You have come into this book an innocent, teeming with beauteous potential. You are the Vestal.
Now, I don't know about you, but some of these line up a little bit too perfectly. The coward and dread, both rooted in fear. The warrior and malice, both fueled by anger. The dove and frolic, both tied to positivity and avoidance of conflict. Even if it's not saying the exact same thing as Keir, they share the same ideas. But then you have the scribe and the vestal, and those don't really fit as neatly onto Keir's system, which actually makes things even more interesting. Because if Keir's framework is about controlling emotions, then maybe Ricken's is about something else. Maybe it's about controlling perception. The scribe, the one who documents and shapes narratives, that's literally what what Ricken is doing with the UUR, and so is Lumon, the Vestal, the innocent, the blank slate, the one most open to transformation. That's exactly what Lumon wants in an ideal employee, and the U Ricken is most focused on. What if Ricken's book is actually reinforcing it in a different way? What if instead of controlling emotions, it's about controlling identity? At their core, both are just systems designed to label people and control how they act. And when you combine this with the fact that Lumon wanted to alter the UUR for innies, it suddenly stops being a coinkydink and starts feeling like another form of indoctrination. And this leaves me with the question, is Ricken actually critiquing Lumon, or is he just another version of Keir? Because at first glance, it seems like the UUR is supposed to be a very Ricken pushback against corporate philosophy. But what if it's just a softer, friendlier version of the same thing? Which brings up a whole nother question, and that is, does Ricken even realize what he's doing? Or is this another reason why Lumon was interested in modifying his book? Because if the UUR can be used to reshape the way innies think, then maybe it wasn't being censored, it was being weaponized.
For you, my friend, are no mere consumer of this book, sucking down nouns and adverbs like a plump babe to the teat. In fact, your relationship to this work is far more intimate and profound.
At this point, we've established that Ricken's book might be more than just nonsense. So now let's talk about the most juiciest moments in the UUR. Ricken casually drops a passing reference to the Dorner truck explosion.
My glorious wife, whom readers of Petard already know as Devon, had felt increasingly anxious with city life since the Dorner truck explosion the previous year, and had been urging me to away with her to the woods.
This would seem totally random except for one thing. The Lexington letter also references the Dorner truck explosion, and if you haven't read the Lexington letter, it's about Peg Kincaid, a severed employee who smuggled out secret messages, and they say this.
I chose to reach out to you because I've seen, among other things, your thorough coverage of the Dorner truck incident on November 3rd.
So now we have a confirmed connection. Devon mentions the explosion in the UUR. Peg Kincaid mentions the explosion in the Lexington letter. The Lexington letter suggests that Lumon was somehow involved in the incident. Now the last part is key, because if the Dorner truck explosion was part of a larger corporate war between Lumon and Dorner Therapeutics, then why was Devon so anxious about it? Did she know more than she let on? Ricken also describes a mysterious trip into the woods following the explosion.
Our companions, who despite being close family have requested I not print their names in my books, agreed to join after I sweetened the deal with a bottle of spiced beer. Per their wishes, I shall refer to these two under the pseudonyms Flip and Nan, though this is regrettable as their real names flow far better with my natural diction.
Now, why would two people so close to Ricken and Devon not want their names published? The biggest clue is who they might actually be. Flip is most likely Mark, and Nan is most likely Gemma. And if that's true, then I'm going to be stating the obvious here, then this means Ricken, Devon, Mark, and Gemma all went on this retreat together. Now, here's where things get even weirder. During this retreat, Ricken writes,
Here, Nan and I read passages from Dr. Zhivago, while Flip and Devon dozed in the warm sun.
Why does this matter, you may ask? I'm slowly starting to talk like Ricken. Well, because, my friends, Dr. Zhivago is a novel about Dr. Yuri Zhivago living during the Russian Revolution, who is torn between two loves, his wife Donya and his passionate affair with Lara. It's about how powerful institutions erase personal freedom, rewrite history, and force people into lives they never truly chose. The Soviet regime suppresses Zhivago's poetry, controls what people can say and do, and ultimately decides who gets to exist and who gets to disappear. Does that sound familiar, my friends? In Severance, we have Mark's Audi who clings to the memory of his wife Gemma, while unknowingly working at the same company that keeps her trapped inside. Meanwhile, his innie falls for Helly, who represents the only real connection he's ever had within Lumon's world. Just like Yuri, Mark is stuck between two identities, two loves, and two completely different realities, one controlled and one kind of free. And just like in Dr. Zhivago, there is a larger force, hello Kier, or the board, making sure that anyone who resists their system is erased. So if Gemma and Ricken were reading this together, was she trying to tell him something? That she was in danger? That something wasn't right? And if she was, did Lumon step in to make sure she wouldn't speak at all? Now, if Gemma suspected she was in danger, maybe she knew something about Lumon that got her targeted. Now, Ricken kind of unofficially confirms that this is Gemma.
I carried it as I walked to the podium at Nan's funeral a year and a half later. A patch of ice on a dark road had taken her life from us. And we were gathered once again, this time to try to find a way to say goodbye.
So let's get this straight. Nan is Gemma. Gemma allegedly died in a car accident on an icy road. Mark and Devon mourned her loss, obviously. But in Severance, we know she's alive inside Lumon. Now, this lines up disturbingly well with Peg Kincaid's fate in the Lexington letter. Peg Kincaid also died in an accident. Peg's death happened a year and a half before the UUR was published. Gemma's death supposedly happened a year and a half before Ricken wrote about it. Are you seeing the pattern here? And that leaves me with the question of what did Gemma know and what did Peg Kincaid know? Did she learn something about Lumon that led her to Severance? Was she made severed against her will? Did Ricken unknowingly document a cover-up in his own book? And could he be next? Now, here are things that we can say with relative certainty. Ricken, Mark, and Devon were close with Gemma before her severance. They took a retreat together where Gemma read Dr. Zhivago, a book about rebellion and hidden truths. Gemma's death happened under suspicious circumstances, just like Peg Kincaid's. So what does this all mean? Let's try to build some theories. Theory number 1. Gemma was targeted by Lumon. She discovered something about Lumon that put her in danger. Her severance was forced rather than voluntary, and her death was staged to explain her disappearance. Theory number 2. Gemma was part of a resistance movement. The Dr. Zhivago reference suggests she was maybe thinking about rebellion. Maybe she and Peg Kincaid were working together and both were taken out. If Ricken was aware of this, his book might be his own way of exposing the truth, possibly unknowingly. And theory number 3, Ricken is closer to the truth than he realizes. He writes off the Dorner truck explosion, the hidden names, and Gemma's death as just life events. But all of these things seem to connect back to Lumon. Did he, most likely accidentally, leave behind a trail of clues? Let me know what you think about this in particular in the comments down below. I am very eager to hear your guys' opinions.
You are its subject. Are you interesting enough? Cool enough? Clever enough? Sexy enough? Wealthy enough? Elegant enough? Are you, well, enough?
Now, this is something I've noticed in the book, and it piqued my interest a little bit, but it's not a theory yet, and if you can help me build on it, I would really, really appreciate that. There is something weird about the way Ricken keeps capitalizing the word destiny. At one point, he writes,
Though belated, I believe the full release of the UUR is ordained by destiny. And destiny, friends, shall deliver all yonder.
After reading this book a few times, I would think this is just Ricken being dramatic. But before this, he drops a whole acrostic poem about destiny, like it's some kind of deep revelation.
D is for dreaming, the start of it all. E is for energy, breaking down walls. S is for stewardship of home and of earth. T is for terror, which gives us more worth. I is for eyes, which observe us with love, Until N, meaning newness, rains down from above. And why? That's a question we needn't now ponder, for destiny, friends, shall deliver all yonder.
What if destiny isn't just a concept for him, but a person? What if it's Gemma? Now, we know for fact he avoids using her real name. He uses Nan instead. And what if destiny was her middle name, a nickname, or even just a metaphor for her disappearance? Then this book might have been even written for her. I might be overthinking, but knowing Severance, nothing is in there by accident. Now, the only question I have here, does Ricken know more than he lets on? And that is it for the you are. Joking. One last thing. We need to talk about Appendix 4 from Season 2, Episode 4, specifically Kier and the Thieving Nanny, or just Appendix 4 in general. This lost chapter, book, which we've never seen before, feels strangely similar to Ricken's writing. The way nature is described, the dramatic storytelling, and the deep thoughts about human roles and purpose. It all sounds exactly like something Ricken would write. Now let's compare. This is from Appendix 4.
Dita became on that night an instrument of nature, and nature played Dita with elegance. I had no choice but to listen as he spilt his lineage upon the soil.
And now, from the UUR, Chapter 2.
My most recent book, My Own Petard, featured my favorite quote from the late Henry David Thoreau. Every man is a virgin until he has known the touch of Mother Nature's mossy flesh.
Now I know that this is a quote from Henry David Thoreau, but both over-romanticize nature, turning it into some grand philosophical experience, which it could be just that. But then, here's another example from Appendix 4.
He always crept like this, at this hour. Once concealed by Flora, my brother unfastened himself. The din of his fervor fell strangely into concert with the music of the wood, and for a moment I could not tell the two apart.
And from the UUR Chapter 2.
I tried to give voice to these sentiments later that evening, as the embers of our campfire slowly nestled into the soil. Devon, for all her sweetness, was irked that we'd stopped early and unreceptive to my musings. Flip, of course, made a joke of it all, pushing his bottom against me in a crude pantomime of a sting attack. Only Nan listened intently, noting the wisdom of the analogy and adding ideas of her own.
Both passages take something simple, being in nature, and turn it into an overly deep reflection on life and existence. And once again, it could just be that. But then there's this dramatic rhythm that feels exactly like Ricken's voice. So here are my questions. Did Ricken write this? Has he been working with Lumon all along and wrote this for them as part of his job? Is this just another version of the UUR book already rewritten for a different audience? Or did Lumon find a way to copy his style to make their teaching sound more digestible? Or, at the end of the day, was Kier a fan of Henry David Thoreau, same as Ricken? Knowing Lumon, I wouldn't be surprised if they've been using his words without him even realizing it.
Are you, well, enough? Consider, yes, you are in fact the you I most affectionately welcome on this journey. We've taken but the first step in discovering which unique and beautiful you are.
And now, refiners, this is it. So after all of this, after reading this literary masterpiece once again, could Ricken, the so-called fool, actually be giving us clues? His book, his philosophies, even Appendix 4 all seem to hint at something bigger. But the real question is, was it intentional, or is he just blindly stumbling into the truth? Either way, he might be more important than we ever realized. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I am extremely interested in hearing all of your opinions, if you agree, if you disagree, and please remember these are just theories. I want to thank you all for watching or listening to this video. If you enjoy this type of content, please be sure to subscribe. And now remember, the important thing is to always keep questioning. Even me. Praise Kier. Until next time.
Dearest reader, this concludes the segment of the You Are that I am currently able to share with you. Please keep in mind that you are now in a state of partial enlightenment, which can be both disorienting and highly dangerous. I urge you to exercise caution whilst in this state and refrain from speaking publicly or driving a car. I would also recommend taking time off work until the book is released and you can ingest its themes in full.